heavily into the war with Gaza. It is raging on all fronts. IDF forces are operating in the north of Gaza, all around the area of Sajadiya, and areas that we thought had already been cleared out, but that the terrorists managed to return to. We're operating also in Rafah, the southern area, Rafah, Rafiah, doesn't matter what you call it, it's that same area. It's that area that borders the Gaza Strip and Egypt. That's where we understand that Hamas's last stronghold is. Many of its last remaining 4 organized battalions are there. Many of the Hamas leadership is there, or much of the Hamas leadership is there. And also we understand many of our hostages that are being held by these genocidal terrorists are also being held in Rafah. In the last few days of operations, the IDF has uncovered hundreds of tunnel shafts all over the area, over 50 tunnels that cross from Egypt into the Gaza Strip and from the Gaza Strip into Egypt. This is critical to understand. You really have tunnels big enough to carry or to allow trucks, the movement of trucks in and out of the Gaza Strip. That means it answers a very simple question. With all the siege that has been claimed that Israel has been imposing on the Gaza Strip, where have the terrorists kept getting their arms from? And the answer is simple. They've got them from Egypt. That's where they've been coming in for this whole period. Egypt, despite the peace agreement with Israel, has been actively helping, assisting the terrorists to really amass huge stockpiles of weapons. That's how we found some weapons from North Korea on the day of the 7th of October massacre in the hands of the terrorists. This is how they continue to be able to smuggle into the Gaza Strip explosives from all types and sizes, RPGs, rockets, rocket launchers, other rocket launchers. It's all over. That's all over the Gaza Strip, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing also the continuation of the fighting in the north. Hezbollah ever escalating its attacks on Israel. Last week we saw an attack that was 50 kilometers into Israel proper. We have tens of thousands of Israeli citizens who have been evacuated from that 10-kilometer strip along our northern border. The entire city of Kiryat Shmona is empty. I was just up there recently for another reason, and you see just how bleak that whole situation is. Attacked on the north, attacked from the south, in Judea and Samaria, the same Hamas terrorists, the same PFLP terrorists, the same Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, Fatah terrorists are also operating all the time and trying their best to carry out massive terrorist attacks. That's why the IDF forces have been responding also with escalating force. We saw a terrorist who was about to carry out, according to IDF intelligence, about to carry out a massive terrorist attack, being neutralized with an attack from an F-16. This is quite a severe change in the security situation there. And we saw, I don't know how many of you saw just yesterday, footage of a group of terrorists in one of the little sideways of an area in Judea and Samaria. They're identified by an IDF drone, which then drops a grenade onto them. We're seeing really, although Judea and Samaria appears to be quiet in comparison with Gaza, and we're not possibly hearing so much about it, the security situation in Judea and Samaria is also close to that level of almost warlike activities. From the south, we're continuing to being attacked by the Houthis. It's a combined operation orchestrated by Iran, operating every single one of its proxies from Syria as well. We're seeing activities, the Syrian militias being quite active also in the attacks on Israel. And then, whilst we have all of these armed attacks, the kinetic attacks, the attacks which really are designed to murder Israelis, we also have that extra war situation. That extra war situation is ostensibly cultured. It's ostensibly legal. It's happening off in The Hague. But in The Hague, let's not be mistaken for 1 minute. We're talking about a war situation, the continuation of the war, just with legal means. It's happening in the ICJ, in the International Court of Justice, if you can call that court a court of justice. It's happening in the International Criminal Court. Again, this is meant to be an institution designed to prosecute the worst of war criminals. Suddenly, on the one hand, you have Yahya Sinwar, the terrorist who orchestrated and commanded the October 7 massacre of civilians, raping, pillaging, taking of hostages. And then on the other hand, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, an elected leader of a democratic country, invoking its right to self-defense against these genocidal terrorists. In The Hague, that doesn't matter. In The Hague, it's all upside down. In The Hague, in the ICJ, it's Israel that is on trial for allegedly, by South Africa at the behest of the Iranians, committing a genocide. In the ICC, Israel is being targeted in an apparently equal way to the terrorists of Gaza. I've got news for Karim Khan, KC, the prosecutor of the ICC. Yahya Sinwar doesn't give a damn about your arrest warrants. He is a genocidal terrorist, and he doesn't care whether you want to arrest him or not. He will carry on with his supreme goal, which is to murder Jews. So to try and understand a little bit of that farce that's been going on in the Hague, really for a couple of months now, I'm joined by Professor Avi Bell from the Faculty of Law at Bar-Ilan University and the University of San Diego, and a senior fellow at the Kohelet Policy Forum. Avi, thank you for joining us. Let's get straight into it, if I may. The hearing that let's start with the ICJ debacle, if we can. The hearing just the end of last week, South Africa again petitioning the ICJ to ask for more measures against Israel, again claiming that the entrance of Israeli forces into Rafah is a breach of the previous orders of the court. Really, they're making up this whole story as they go. An initial question before we start, and maybe you can address that as you talk. Had you been appearing on Israel's behalf, would you have first asked for the president of the court to recuse himself? This is Nawaf Salam. He is the president of the ICJ. He is of Lebanese origin. Lebanon is at war with Israel. In his previous positions as the Lebanese ambassador to the UN, he expressed his opinion that Israel is an apartheid country. In what normal legal system would that person still sit on a bench and any of the participants in that procedure not ask for him to be recused?
Well, I think that there's an important thing to remember regarding all of these proceedings, and that is it is unwise for Israel to treat them with the dignity of legal proceedings. They're not really, and let me explain what I mean. If you were observing a trial in an Alabama courtroom in the 1920s, in which a black man was being put on trial for the murder of a white woman, it's true that if you went earlier into that same courtroom and watched a contract dispute, it would look very much like an ordinary legal proceeding. But when you get to the criminal proceeding against a black man in the 1920s in Alabama, you're not looking at a legal proceeding anymore. What you're looking at is a bit of political theater, where it's understood that everyone there is carrying out their part in persecuting the undesired class and the undesired person. And even if there should be a trial that reaches a legal conclusion, it's fairly clear that outside the courtroom, there will be waiting, or outside the police station, there will be waiting a mob, maybe, by the way, involving the very same police or the very same judges, that will take care to lynch the prisoner if, for whatever reason, the court doesn't take care of executing him first. These are not legal proceedings, okay, at least as far as Israel is concerned. Israel is in the position of the black man in the 1920s Alabama courtroom. There is no chance of a fair trial. There is no chance that anybody even cares about the law. So what's the point of appearing and making any argument about recusal of the Chief Justice, about the standards of evidence, about all these equitable claims, equal, clean hands and the like? And the answer is that there's only one reason to do this, only one reason to appear, and that's to be able to have a platform to which to make from which to make Israel's case to the world. I think that that platform has exhausted itself, and it is no longer worthwhile for Israel to participate in this farce.
It's unbelievable, Avi. We joined the Genocide Convention back in the 1950s, already when it first came out, and now it's being used against Israel by this court that we seem to have agreed ahead of time to its jurisdiction. And now we're almost forced to play out that perverted role of wantonly coming before a court that's biased, knowing that we have no chance there, and yet we still have to go through
we are not
process.
forced. No, we are not forced. Let's divide this between two separate issues. Okay, so technically, in this case, the ICJ has jurisdiction. This is unlike, let's say, the ICC, which is proceeding completely without jurisdiction. And Israel could and should take steps to strip the ICJ of any jurisdiction. It should withdraw from the jurisdiction granting clause of the Genocide Convention. It should have done this years ago when it saw what direction the ICJ is going in, and it should still do that today. And should withdraw from every jurisdiction granting clause in every treaty that Israel's involved in. That said, the fact that it formally has jurisdiction does not necessarily force Israel to participate in a farce. Again, when you have a case like this, where it is absolutely plain what the court is doing, where it is going, how it is abusing the legal standards that it has created in order to support terrorists and persecute the victims, in order to support genocide and persecute the victims, in order to take this little thread of pretend crime by the Jewish state, in order to order Israel to surrender its war effort to the terrorists. And when you see something like that, it's just not worth participating in. And whether it's formally a case where the court has jurisdiction or not, doesn't make any difference if the court itself is not acting like a court. It's not acting like a court. Israel should not be participating in this farce.
And so I can, if I can maybe assume to take that step one step forward, that argument one step forward. Tomorrow there's meant to be, after the hearings last week, tomorrow there's meant to be a reading of the decision of the judges whether to add interim measures in order to maybe order Israel to stop fighting in Rafah and to concede and really surrender to the terrorists. What do you think Israel would do in that type of with that type of an order?
Well, I think that from the very beginning, Israel should have refused to follow any of these orders. The orders are perverse. They are not in accordance with international law. They're in accordance with a made-up theory the court has given for itself, that any time that somebody goes to the court and the court wants to act on whatever it feels like acting, it can do so. This is not the only case in which they've done it, although it is by far the most perverse case in which the court has done it. And there's an obvious response. And by the way, Israel would be far from the only state in the world to do this. When the court issues a judgment like this, the right thing to do is to follow international law instead of the court and refuse to comply with the interim measures. And again, Israel would be in very good company in doing so. In roughly half of the cases of the ICJ, they issue orders that are ignored by the parties. Now, the wisest course would have been to do this immediately. When they, for example, when the ICJ issued an order demanding that Israel give a report saying that it's not committing genocide, the right thing to do would have been to refuse to file that report. For whatever reason, I cannot figure out the logic behind it. Um, the team that is conducting this on behalf of Israel, the legal team and the diplomatic team, are convinced that we have to play this as if we're facing an institution with legal integrity and that is unbiased. And we have to comply with their orders no matter what they are. And therefore, we issued a report. And I don't understand why we would have done something so foolish. And in doing so, we've set ourselves up for a situation where we have now where the coming interim orders are going to be things we simply can't comply with. For example, they're going to order us to surrender a battle to Hamas, to surrender a battle in Rafah. That's what South Africa is asking for here. And obviously, Israel cannot comply with such a perverse order. It cannot leave control of this crucial city in the hands of the barbaric genocidal terrorist group that carried out the atrocities of October 7th. So Israel's going to have to ignore the interim order. It would have been wiser to ignore interim orders previously. But when this one comes around, and by the way, I'm not 100% sure of the outcome. I'm only 90% sure of the outcome. But I can tell you that if it does, the interim order that we have to disobey doesn't come tomorrow, it will come the next day. That is, it's surely coming down the pike. We're going to get to the situation very rapidly where they're going to order us to do something that we cannot do. And then we're going to have to say no. And it's a shame that we haven't learned to say no until now.
And it appears that Israel really is playing along with the court, giving it all of the respect that it would give a normal, legitimate court. Even though we do clearly understand, and I hope that the Israel team running that whole process understands that the court isn't a legitimate court. It isn't acting in a legitimate manner. It isn't treating Israel in a fair manner in any way, shape, or form. And so, why do you think that we really would participate in that farce? Even using, is there any benefit that's gained to us for, as you said, presenting our case to the world, or would it be more beneficial to just publish all of these things on the website of the Ministry of Justice or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and present that case to the world, which, by the way, I haven't seen those documents being presented in that way. For example, Dr. Gilad Noam, when he was arguing the case on Friday, didn't seem to be, not on Friday, a few days ago, didn't seem to be presenting all of the information in an open manner, showing where all of the rocket launchers that had been identified in Rafah had been placed. That doesn't seem to be open to the public. Am I missing something there, Avi?
Let's understand. I don't think that the team is so blind, the Israeli team is so blind as to not see the bias of the court, as to fail to understand that this is not really a legal proceeding, that it's a political proceeding that employs legal rhetoric and that is biased against the Jewish state. I think that they obviously see that. They're intelligent enough people to see what's plainly in front of their faces. I think that they're locked into a strategy for reasons that I'm not sure that I fully grasp. I think that part of it, a major part of it, is just groupthink. That you have a lot of people that are gathered together, they're intelligent, that are involved in political battles in Israel. They don't want anyone to break into their inner circle, and everyone within the inner circle circles the wagons and agrees with one another, no matter how foolish the comments are that are being made. And their strategy is to play this straight, to play this as if, even though they know otherwise, to play this as if this is a legal proceeding, to make legal arguments, to go to the court, to dress up in the uniform, and pretend that there's some integrity here. And I believe that there is a naive hope that if Israel does this, if it plays the game as if it's real, and if it makes meritorious legal arguments, that somebody somewhere is going to listen. And I have to agree with you, Maurice, that if that's all that we're trying to do, And that's I think, the best case scenario of what we're trying to do. If that's all that we're trying to do, then we would be better off just putting these documents on a website and letting people of good conscience and open minds read them and evaluate for themselves. And we should shun this court, so-called, that is doing nothing more than participating in a farce, in a Dreyfus trial.
What you just described, Avi, and this may sound a little bit harsh, but I think it is really the understanding of what you described, is that in the same way as people ask what exactly happened on the 7th of October, where was the IDF, where was our response, where were our defenses? And the answer is that we were all living in the same conception, this conception that Hamas was deterred, that the terrorists were deterred. It would seem from what you just suggested that the legal community, or at least some parts of it, are living in that same conception that there is a legal manner to deal with this, with the court and what's going on there. And even though it would appear that they're proved wrong time and time again, that same conception still stands, and they don't try anything new.
I think, unfortunately, there's a lot to that. Israel's for many years been prone to problems of groupthink, and the reason is this is a relatively small and highly cohesive society that has real enemies, and therefore unity on a lot of matters is very, very important. And when you have closed groups like that that are making decisions, it's prone to groupthink, even if you're dealing with people that are very, very bright, as the book put it, the best and the brightest. The best and the brightest, who are gathered together in closed circles to think about problems, tend to groupthink their way through. And that means that whether they get to the right answer or the wrong answer, they're immovable and go along the line forever. And I think that we have that problem in the military, where the military has adopted failed strategies and then stuck with them through failure after failure. And we have that problem in the legal and diplomatic corps as well, where some of the strategies that have been adopted are failed strategies, and they keep failing. And no one is willing to stand up against the group and say, we have to stop and try something else.
So that really brings us on to the next subject, which is really connected. It's the same subject, just just in a different format. The ICC. When I argued already in November 2020 that arrest warrants would be issued against Prime Minister Netanyahu, the international lawyers at least in Israel, shouted at me. They said, you don't know what you're talking about. The court isn't going to even accept the request of the prosecutor to define the borders of this non-existent state. And even if they do, they won't open an investigation, and we're engaging with the court. All of that seems to have just gone so horribly wrong, to the point where Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor for the ICC, is now asking the court to issue arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu and against the Minister of Defense Gallant for the crimes of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare. He's claiming that the fact that we closed the borders and the border crossings that were so really tremendously attacked and destroyed by Hamas, who actually were the ones who closed those border crossings, and the fact that we were not immediately providing our enemies with all of the resources that they needed to keep on fighting, that we are responsible for the crime of starvation, for wanton killing, willful killing, all of these different crimes that come up as Israel simply tries to invoke its right to self-defense. What are we doing wrong there as well, Avi? Why do we not understand that the ICC, similar to the ICJ, has lost its path, and there too we're not going to get a fair trial?
This too, I have to say, I know you're not the only person who's been worrying about charge sheets against Netanyahu, because I've been doing it for
I know
several
you've been
years, and I
doing it,
know,
Adam.
yeah, and others have. We're simply outside of the group, and precisely because we say such things, we are not going to be invited into the group, because the group speaks in one voice, and that voice is not ours. And even when the group says really foolish things, like going and appearing before Knesset committees or the prime minister's office and telling them, don't worry, there is no chance that there will ever be any charges, because Israel has a robust and independent legal system which acts as an iron dome against any criminal charges in the ICC. And now it turns out that it doesn't. The group will still not change its direction. It will still not assess its failure. It will absolutely not admit that it was wrong. You'll see all sorts of bizarre arguments. One of the I don't want to mention his name, but somebody who's fairly senior in these things published in the newspaper the other day. Well, it may be that there were charges, but if you look at the body language of Karim Khan, you can see he was a little bit uncomfortable with it. So it's a very good thing that we were working with him, and we should continue working with him. And I'll have to say that here, that's exactly what we've been doing. It's to me, this is unbelievable negligence. We've been seeing this coming down the pike for years. The preliminary criminal investigation against Israel was opened in 2015. And because it was a preliminary investigation, the prosecutor at the time was required to file reports annually telling us about how the preliminary investigation was going. And all the reports were completely one-sided, right? And in the wrong direction. They were all of them were insinuating that senior Israelis had committed purely imaginary crimes, and brushing off all the actual real crimes that were committed by the Palestinians. The preliminary investigation only ended when belatedly the prosecutor went to the court and asked the court to reassure her that she has jurisdiction, even though she does not. And the court, of course, duly did so. It duly said, oh, yes, you have jurisdiction, even though she clearly did not. And since 2021, this has been a full criminal investigation aimed at producing charge sheets. And Karim Khan, the current prosecutor, has not made a secret of the fact that that's where he's going, that he wants to bring charges not only against the defense minister and the prime minister, but the way he put it, every foot soldier in the Israeli army. He intends to go after everyone. And it's obvious that's where he's going. And yet, even as it's obvious that that's where he's going, the criminal charges were leaked to the press about 2 weeks ago. And yet we find out now that Karim Khan had been invited back to Israel and was supposed to be on his way to Israel at exactly the time he was holding his press conference in order to announce these travesties of justice. And I can't understand how it is that anybody could possibly think that it was a wise thing to invite him to Israel in order to boost the credibility of this Dreyfus trial. It's unthinkable. And I'll add more. As we are speaking, Karim Khan is trying to resell the Brooklyn Bridge to this Israeli team. He's saying, you should invite me in so that we can negotiate this. This will be important for your claim of complementarity, something I'll say more about in just a moment. And there are senior members of the Israeli team that are insisting on returning to cooperating with Khan. It's just, again, it's unthinkable, and yet it's happening. Now, one of the things, again, as I said, that you've had senior members in the legal team, the diplomatic team, that have been assuring us for years that because Israel has a robust legal system, which it does, maybe too robust, but that's a matter for another day. Right? Has a robust legal system. It's an independent legal system. And therefore, they say, under the doctrine of complementarity, The court should respect Israel's decisions to charge or to investigate and not to charge, or whatever procedure it carries out in order to ensure compliance with the law. There's no grounds on which the court can exercise jurisdiction. Now, this is absolutely right and absolutely naive. It's absolutely right because complementarity does take away the jurisdiction of the court in cases like this. On the other hand, there are lots of other doctrines that take away the jurisdiction of the court. The fact that Palestine is not a state, for example. Right? But the court is perfectly willing to ignore all of them because this is all, again, this is all political theater. This is not about the law. And so it's just as happy to ignore complementarity as everything else. And I'll add, the prosecutors just put out this turgid memo. You have to read it 5 times backwards in order to start beginning to understand what it's getting at. But it's about complementarity and cooperation. And the bottom line of it is this, that the court doesn't view complementarity as a bar in exercising jurisdiction. No. What the court, the way the prosecutor views complementarity is it's an invitation to the court to try to coerce states to act against so-called criminals before the charges are filed, after the charges are filed, and all along the way, and that it means nothing else. If the state, for example, in this case, if Israel doesn't hold a kangaroo court hearing for Netanyahu and Gallant and convict them of this imaginary crime, then that proves that there's no complementarity, and therefore the ICC can go ahead. It's catch-22, right? So what's the right thing to do? Don't cooperate. Don't give him the excuse to claim that there's complementarity. What we have to be doing is taking proactive measures against the court, sanctioning the court, sanctioning its personnel. There are such sanctions in some countries already. There should be in Israel. There are in the United States. There should be in Israel as well. There should be in other civilized countries, countries that understand that Karim Khan is sacrificing any possibility of international rule of law in order to placate the world's oldest bigoted hatred. And they should be sanctioning the court as well. Everyone should withdraw their funds. Everyone should withdraw from the treaty. Anyone that is with a sense of what it means to have a legal system and an understanding of the need to fight bigotry and this travesty of a political institution.
So, I mean, there actually were a few countries that, even as part of the process of asking for jurisdiction that they didn't have and receiving jurisdiction that they didn't have, and since issuing the announcement of the request to issue arrest warrants, there have been a number of countries who have said that they don't believe that the court has jurisdiction and shouldn't be operating or acting in the way that it's doing. What do you think the likelihood of any of these countries actually pulling out of the ICC are?
They're not terribly great. We have to look back. There was a scandal more than a decade ago about the ICC's bias against African states. And let's understand the ICC's pretty much through its entire history been not only an ineffective court, but a biased court. It targeted the politically weak. And that's why African states were a very good target. And that's, of course, now why Israel is a very good target. Right? Everyone knew of this bias. And a number of African states threatened to drop out. But of the dozens that spoke of it, in the end, you can count on one hand the number that left the treaty, and half of them returned. So it's, for whatever reason, there's very little courage in the world to confront what's happening in the ICC. If states were not willing to demonstrate this courage to protect themselves, African states were not willing to demonstrate this courage to protect themselves against the court, what are the chances that they're going to now find the courage to protect the Jewish state? I think it's not that high.
You have European countries who have nonetheless expressed their objection to these procedures. They don't seem to be hurrying either. They don't seem to understand that these decisions, which really do warp the entire nature of international humanitarian law, of the laws of war, and subjugate them almost to this political agenda against the Jews, can't only be used against the Jews, or can it?
Well, they can be, and that's exactly why they're not rushing. That is, it's perfectly possible to have an international institutional system that over a long period of time has one rule of law for the Jews and a different one for everyone else. And we've seen that for decades now. We've seen it for decades in the ICJ. We've seen it for decades in the UN and all sorts of affiliated bodies. We've seen it in the European Union. We've seen it both internally in European states. We've seen it in EU institutions, and we've seen it in states that are at the bordering the EU that have participated in this double standard. So it's very possible to carry on a double standard for a long, long time. And the fact that the rules that they're making up in order to criminalize Jews for exercising self-defense would spell the end of any other state, any civilized, democratic, liberal state that had to fight for its existence, doesn't bother them because they know they'll never be asked to fight under those rules. These are Jew-only rules.
One of the amazing things that I saw alongside his decision to ask for the arrest warrants, Karim Khan also published a memo written by 5 experts that supported his requests. One of the things that they wrote there was one of the many ridiculous things they wrote there was that the fact that Israel has started a war against Hamas, but in starting that war, it didn't ask the permission of Mahmoud Abbas, the other genocidal leader that pays terrorists to murder Jews, and therefore this turns the whole conflict into an international armed conflict. Really, do any of them actually hear themselves when they write that Israel, the sovereign democratic country, has to go to this dictator in Ramallah, who's now in his 20th year of his first 4-year term, to get permission to invoke its right of self-defense against genocidal terrorists? Like,
well, they too are engaging in groupthink. It's a group of like-minded people who all hate the Jewish state or hate the Jewish people, and have a good acquaintance with international legal rhetoric, not very much of acquaintance with international law, and come up with one after the other the most outlandish theories to support their own prejudice, and carry it out throughout the institution, and nobody's going to tell them otherwise. Right? The internal group, when somebody comes up with a crazy idea like that, they pat them on the back and put it in the text.
And obviously having the 2 token Jews out of the 5 probably gives it that much more gravitas.
Well, there's always the strategy, and unfortunately, there are many Jews around the world who've followed it. That when you see a bear in the camp, you try to outrun the fellow campers so that the bear gets to eat them first, and hope the bear never gets to you because it's satisfied eating the others. There happen to be people like that in almost every one of these efforts.
So what's going to happen now? I heard a minister in the government who I really do have a tremendous amount of respect for. I think he's really one of the greater thinkers that we have in Israel, expressing some type of skepticism about the decision of the court on the request of the prosecutor, almost as if to say, don't worry, we can rely on the judges to reject the request to issue arrest warrants. Would you go to the bank with that argument?
Here, let's understand. I think most of the the elected leadership, as opposed to the legal and diplomatic leadership, understands exactly what a farce this is. I don't think that there's any chance that Netanyahu or Gallant will be foolish enough to submit themselves to the tender mercies of the court. When they issue their next warrants against Israelis, which, by the way, will almost certainly include people in the legal and diplomatic sphere, when they do, those people will not be foolish enough to turn themselves either. I think that this sort of naive attribution of integrity to the legal institutions, the ICC and the ICJ, is the sort of thing that people say when it's cheap talk, when they know that it's not their neck on the line. But for the most part, the elected leadership has been very good, and they understand something that Benjamin Franklin said around the time of the American Revolution. He said, "We must all hang together, or we shall most assuredly all hang separately." And that's the situation that we're in. I think most understand it. It's the problem is that the legal and diplomatic team that's been in charge of handling our responses until this point does not seem to understand that. And it's possible to bring in some fresh blood. It's time to make new kinds of decisions that are more proactive and help us attack these institutions that have gone awry, and hopefully somebody will find the courage to bring in new people.
So one of the decisions I think that was particularly dangerous of the court a few years ago was the decision against Jordan in the case of Omar al-Bashir, who also had been had an arrest warrant issued against him, and he came to Jordan to participate in the discussions of the Arab League. And Jordan didn't arrest him. They let him participate and went on. The court really did make clear the situation that once you're a country that joins the court, our decisions override everything else. And so they reprimanded Jordan for not arresting Omar al-Bashir. How do you think now, let's assume that the arrest warrants will be issued. Will Prime Minister Netanyahu no longer be able to go to any of the 123 countries in the world that are members of the court for fear of being arrested?
Well, Omar al-Bashir is a great case. He was an actual criminal, and he traveled fairly freely around the world. He just had to go before he went anywhere. He got assurances, and so here, one of the great ironies is one of the places that he traveled was the ANC's South Africa. Despite the fact that he was under indictment for carrying out actually a real genocide, not a defensive war against a terrorist organization, the way South Africa is slandering Israel, but a real genocide. And of course, South Africa allowed him to come and feted him and sent him back on his way. Yes, I think that it is very, very likely that the court will approve the warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant. I think it's very, very likely that Karim Khan will come up with more against more Israelis, senior and junior. I think that the court will rubber stamp those as well. And I think that this will go on until Karim Khan and his staff feel that they're under enough pressure from international sanctions that they ought to consider maybe following the law. And so until that time, yes, every Israeli leader has to be careful in their travels. They have to, but let me just add, they have to have been careful now for many years. There have been attempts for a number of years already to spring traps for Israelis when they travel. We all remember that a few years ago, Doron Almog was on a flight to London, and while it was in the air, some anti-Israel activists managed to spring out some arrest warrants, and sheriffs were waiting at the exit of the plane to try to grab Doron Almog, and he was warned and he turned around. And this is something we just have to be aware of, that there are all over the world, there are people who want to participate in the effort in the jihad against Israel. and want to participate in the form of twisting the law to try to criminalize Jews. And so every Israeli who's served in the army, every Israeli who's spoken out loud about the rights of self-defense, every Jew who has any relationship whatsoever has to be cautious and understand that there is a danger that they will try to kidnap you and put you in custody to hold a show trial to convict you of a non-crime. You have to be aware of this. When you travel, be careful.
Is there any fear, Avi, that that both of these incidents, both the ICJ and Karim Khan hurrying as he was meant to be on his way to Israel for consultations, submitting these requests at this specific timing, is there any real reason to assume that that both of those moves weren't specifically designed to impede Israel's entry into Rafah, literally using the lawfare as a means to stop the tanks rolling in against the terrorists?
Well, it might be, right? So there are some various reports. I'm not 100% sure. I wouldn't even say I'm 50% sure of their reliability, but there are reports about the contacts between South Africa and Iran on the management of the pro-Hamas anti-Israel case, and it wouldn't, these reports, even if they're not true, even if there isn't actual open cooperation, I think that there is some clear desire on the side of South Africa and of the president of the ICJ and the anti-Israel team at the ICC prosecutor's office to coordinate things to rescue Hamas and to hurt Israel. I think that there's a very clear understanding among all of the actors, even if the messages are not being passed overtly. Right? That said, I wouldn't put too much to the timing of anything, particularly not in the ICC. The ICC is a slow-moving ship. The idea to issue charges against Israel is nearly well, it's more than a decade old at this point, and the ICC has been moving in that direction since 2015. So you can move up or move back the deadline for these charge sheets by a few weeks, by a few months. But ultimately, this is not a ship that moves very quickly, and the direction in which it's been sailing has been clear for many, many, many years. Right. So I wouldn't attribute too much to the timing. Nothing that's happened in the last week or two or three is an explanation for why Karim Khan is doing this.
There really has been for many, many weeks. Israel had stopped, basically since before Ramadan, stopped operating in Gaza. The building of the floating port by the US, $300 million that had been invested in that, with Israel's permission, obviously, and with Israel allowing that to happen. The aid trucks going in, and you see all these really massive hangars of aid and food. We saw yesterday pictures of bisley and cans of Coke and Nutella as part of that humanitarian package for the allegedly starving Gazans. That all seems to indicate that this whole story that's being cooked up really just doesn't have any basis whatsoever. My background, as you know, I was a prosecutor for many, many years, the head of the prosecution in Judea and Samaria. I don't think I can look at any of these situations and say, well, I think there's actually a legitimate basis to go forward. One of the indictments, as it were, the starvation indictment, is an indictment which has never really been tried before in the history of man. Starvation used to be a legitimately accepted means of warfare until it changed in the 60s and 70s. And really now we're seeing the prosecutor moving forward in a situation which is both unclear and has all types of mitigating circumstances, which doesn't seem to really affect him in any way, shape, or form. Is there no standard of proof that's required there?
Yeah, let's understand what's behind these charges. Okay, so there is international law about the provision of aid. Okay, the international law about provision of aid is fairly straightforward, which is that in an armed conflict, or especially in a case where a party imposes a siege, the warring party is required to facilitate the delivery of certain humanitarian objects, primarily food and medicines. Nothing else, by the way, food and medicines. There's the other minor things that are we can argue about whether they fall under that, but food and medicines. And facilitating does not mean delivering yourself. And it also means that if there is any danger of diversion to the enemy, then the duty ends and it is no longer necessary to facilitate such provision. Now, in this case, there's not only a fear of diversion, there's a certainty of diversion, right? Israel absolutely knows that the supplies are being diverted to Hamas and that they're serving the enemy's purposes rather than being used primarily for humanitarian relief. And not only that, this is a situation where on the other side is a terrorist organization and so defined under international law, which means there is a legal duty not to provide even passive support to the terrorist organization. So Israel is not only doing much, much more than it's required to do under the law of humanitarian supply provision, it's in fact doing too much, right, under international law. Now, what does that have to do then with the law? Now, here you get to the way that cases are put together against Israel. So the law here is fairly clear, and Israel is not violating that law. If Israel is violating the law, it's only in giving too much to a terrorist organization. And the complaint should be Israel should give less. Israel should block more supplies. But that doesn't interest the prosecutor because, again, this is not a legal case, right? So the case is built by combining three elements. First of all, when you talk about starvation as a method of warfare, when you talk about crimes of distinction targeting civilians as such, you're talking about crimes that have very specific mental states that are required, very specific intent by the accused. And the rules of international law when it comes to Jews is that Jews' evil intent can always be imputed. You do not have to bring proof. You can just assert it. And that's the basis of this one. Right. If you want, you can take some unrelated quotes by politicians that talk about this, that, and the other, and the price of tea in China. But really, that's not relevant. You assume evil motive. And in fact, Khan said that himself in a press conference in Cairo when he was describing the crimes that he would be looking into. He said that crimes against Hamas have to be proved, and Israel is going to have to prove that it had a legitimate motive for every target that it attacked. Right, a complete reversal of the general understanding. So that's the mental aspect. Then we get to the question of facts. Like what, if Israel is starving the population of Gaza as a matter of policy, you would expect some Gazans to die of starvation. Right? This war has been going on for a half a year, but that doesn't seem to happen. It's always on the cusp of it, and it never happens. In fact, as far as you can measure the introduction of supplies into Gaza, Gaza is better fed now than it was before the atrocities of October 7th, right? So what do you do about that fact? It seems like the facts are entirely contrary to what they're claiming. The answer is they don't have to worry about the facts either. When it comes to indictments against Jews and international institutions and claims against them, what you do to put together the fact part, the evidence part of the case is you take some anecdotes that are put together by terrorist sympathizers or terrorist operatives, and you dress them up in a nice narrative, you put them in an affidavit, and that's it, and there you have your evidence. And the last thing that they do is that they twist the legal standards. Now, what we've been talking about when we're talking about humanitarian supplies, we're talking about humanitarian supplies. What are the rules under which you have to facilitate their delivery? But that's not what Khan is doing. What Khan is doing is saying that if you don't live up to the rules that I set for delivering humanitarian supplies, then you have committed the war crime of starvation. Now, the war crime of starvation is not invented now. It has a meaning. It's just that he's taking the traditional meaning, throwing it out, and now twisting this new definition of a crime around what he is alleging against Israel. And that's the third and maybe most central element. You just twist the law around where you want to end up going. Now, all of this works because Khan has absolute confidence of one of two things. Either there will never be a trial because nobody's ever going to show up, or if there is a trial, the court is going to go along with this farce and convict any Jew that is put in the dock. And I think that's a good assumption of Khan's. Unfortunately, I think that he's right. Either no one will show up, or if they do show up, the court will go along with the farce.
That's unfortunately what I believe is not setting a new standard for international law, but setting a Jew standard for international law. Avi, unfortunately, our time has really run away from us. Thank you very much for your comments and your insights. Maybe we should actually start, as they have in the army, the Ifcha Mistabra, this other alternative approach that could and should be adopted, at least challenging the institutions that are at the moment running what is clearly a failed defense. Maybe that's something that we can do in the future. For all of our audience, if you would like to, you can join us regularly for the War Room updates. Go onto the JCPA website, www.jcpa.org, and click on the YouTube icon and subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's also a donation button there if you feel the desire to become partners with us in trying to present Israel's case and trying to present this wider spectrum of analysis for what's going on in the entire Middle East. Avi, again, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll really reserve the right to have you back again very soon when we see how these all these different cases do develop.
Thank you, and I look